Hello, and welcome to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Let's unpack the relationships that we encounter in our daily lives and learn about what makes them tick. And now your host for Red Rock Relationships, Dr. James B. Stein.
If you're listening to this, it means you have the secret access to the bonus episode. No, I'm just kidding. This is the real, true, proper season finale of Red Rock Relationships. It's also our 70th episode, which is a wild thing for me to say. That's so many episodes. And episodes like these would not be doable without the assistance of my amazing, extremely well-educated guests. And I've got three. Oh, and of course, our producer, Sean.
Thanks.
Yeah, our producer, Sean, who puts the whole thing together and doesn't even charge me a penny for it, does it out of the kindness of his heart. So thank yous all around. 70 is such a great number. Anyway, we've done one episode like this before. It's going to be a long-form episode, a bit longer than normal. And to help me, I have not one, not two, but three amazing researchers to talk about something that we've been putting off for years, literally putting it off for years. Sean, am I allowed to curse on air?
Shit, yeah.
All right. The title of today's episode is called "Why the Love Languages Are Bullshit and I Hate Them." The title is lacking nuance, but I don't think that the conversation will be devoid of nuance. I've got three awesome scholars who have been on the show before to help me, so I'll announce them all at once, and then we'll just get right into it. So first, we've got Dr. Colter Ray, assistant professor at the University of Tampa. We have Dr. Samantha Shabib, assistant professor at the University of Alabama. Alabama Birmingham. I got that right? I had a mini panic attack.
Alabama at Birmingham.
Alabama
Okay.
at Birmingham. And then we have Dr. Rachel Vanderbilt, who works in the private sector. And is it okay if we congratulate you on your new position?
Yes.
So Dr. V will be working at Hinge, the dating app. Isn't that so fun? And so it's the perfect group, in my opinion, to talk about this because of the various focuses on dating relationships, social support, and interpersonal communication overall. So to my three guests, I won't ask you to all, give cordialities at once, but thank you all collectively for being here. Are you all ready to go?
Yeah.
That was perfect. Everybody said it at once. That was awesome. Okay. We got to start at the very most basics. Now, most people know what the love languages are, but we should do a quick little recap as to what the love languages are and who Gary Chapman is. So, I think in terms of reciting them from memory, Rachel, you've probably got them committed to memory. Do you want to walk us quickly through what the love languages are, and then maybe we can spend a little bit of time talking about who Dr. Gary Chapman is?
Yeah. Would you like me to just give the story of love languages? I can give kind of an overview.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Okay. So in the 90s, this guy, his name is Dr. Gary Chapman, came up with this idea called the 5 love languages. And in this book, he positions us as having something called a love tank, which is a receptacle that we have internally that fills up as our partner expresses love to us. And he says that one's love tank can only be filled if their partner expresses love to them in their love language. Now, as researchers, I think the thing that's kind of interesting about love languages is that it's positioned both as how we innately give love to others, like our default method of giving love to a partner, but also the way we prefer to receive love from a partner as well. So in this case, our love tank gets filled when our partner expresses love to us in our desired way to receive love. And he says that there are 5 love languages, and those are quality time, acts of service, words of affirmation, physical touch, and gift giving. And I can keep going. He's kind of got these postulates that we have one primary love language, which is the way we prefer to receive love, and that if our partner expresses love to us in our primary love language, that in turn is going to improve the quality of our relationships. Is that a helpful narrative of love languages?
Yeah, I think that's so concise and well said. And importantly, Gary Chapman himself is not without bias, right? Forgetting the fact that the book itself is loosely but not empirically based within research. Gary Chapman himself has a lot of, we'll call it cultural influence. I'm going to be very vague with it, that positions him in a way that his biases, his way of viewing the world deeply informs not just the love languages, but the language that he uses in his book. It is very dogmatic at times, very much nested within a specific type of Christianity. And it's not that Christianity is inherently wrong or bad or anything like that. However, we got to be really, really clear about when we're doing science, the difference between that and like anecdotally using our worldview to inform our postulations. Sammy, Coulter, do you have any thoughts on the love languages, what they are, what they aren't, or on like the methodology that we used to get there in the 90s and then into the early 2000s?
Yeah,
I think, go ahead, Sammy.
No, you go first.
Okay. I think when I think about the love languages, to me, it's a double-edged sword in that there are a lot of things that don't align with what the actual research says. But on the flip side, from a pragmatic standpoint, as someone whose profession is being a professor of interpersonal communication and teaching a bunch of typically 18 to 22-year-olds how to be better in their relationships, it is always nice whenever students come into class ready to talk about relationships and things about relationships because of something they read. And oftentimes that is the love languages. They know them, they talk about them, and to me, they are a starting point for a bigger conversation where you can oftentimes, as a professor, ask questions and challenge things, and also just get them to maybe think deeper than where the love languages stop in terms of what they convey. That's my take. Like when I first heard of this podcast episode, that was my first thought.
Very nice. Sammy, any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of flaw in the research, and I think that that's where I have like the biggest problem with it, especially because it's become so popularized and everybody does seem to be reading the book and, taking things away from it, which kind of gives me a little bit of an ick, because I also think as consumers of information, we need to also do our due diligence by understanding, more the scientific aspect of it and not taking everything verbatim just because somebody says it's true. It's really like our due diligence to make sure that we're understanding and articulating and evaluating things that are presented to us. I do think it's kind of a good starting point for a typology of the different ways in which we kind of communicate love, but it needs to be kind of expanded upon from there. And it's got its problems in terms of, relying on like one as our primary and then a second one as our secondary. We communicate love in a variety of different ways consecutively, and sometimes those change and evolve over time as well.
Shout out to the ick. If you're interested in learning more about the ick, you can see season 7, episode 7 of this very show where we discussed the ick. I think Coulter and Sammy, you two both are hearkening on an important point that I want to reiterate here, sort of in this next question, because folks like Rachel and myself, we're a little bit more forceful with our repudiation of the typology. And there's a lot of researchers who will go out there and they'll say things like, well, the love languages aren't quote unquote real. But to your points, I mean, the behaviors described in the book are objectively real. Acts of service, quality time, physical touch, affirming words, etc. These are all real things, actual behaviors that are observable. Most, if not all of us, do them in some capacity in our relationships. So I'll start with Rachel again. What's not quote unquote real about the love languages? What makes us say that, oh, these aren't real?
Yeah, so it is not that there is an inherent problem with this idea that there's lots of ways that love can be experienced in our relationships, and that we should try and tailor the love that we're giving to our partners in ways that make them feel valued and respected and cared for. Like, there is value in that concept. But this idea that you can only fill your love tank if your partner speaks a specific love language to you is what's not real about it. And the science behind it. So when Gary Chapman did this wrote this book, right? It came from his experience counseling couples in his church. And as you mentioned, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But he didn't do validation of these postulates before he wrote them in a book and like recommended them in his therapy practice, right? And so he goes into his book and says like, hey, nice lady at my church who hates her husband and is really having a hard time navigating abuse, right? Like, your husband just feels like he's not experiencing love in his love language, right? And so all you have to do is express love to him through physical touch. And you should do that multiple times over the next month and journal about it. And that's going to fix all your relationship problems. And magically, her husband in the end did feel more loved, right? Like it worked. That's simply not scientific. It is not empirically valid and it's harmful. And the research says that there is no evidence that expressing love in a primary love language does a better job at impacting and affecting your relationship than expressing love in any other way. So just the science does not support these suppositions that are being made in this book.
Yeah, my big thing with it is just if we could do like a quick sample of 3. Speak up and tell me if I'm wrong. Anybody not like receiving gifts? Sean, you're included in on this. Anybody not a big fan of getting gifts? How about
the thing?
No, go ahead.
Also, the thing with gifts too is that like you feel the need to reciprocate, right? Like it presses on you. Like if somebody gives you a gift, you feel like you are now indebted to reciprocate that gift at some point too. And so a lot of people don't like receiving gifts because of that.
Because of the social pressure.
Norm kind of,
right.
Yeah, it kicks in.
Yeah. So I mean, the act of receiving a gift in a vacuum is ideal though, right? We get a thing for doing nothing. It's kind of nice. Yeah. Same thing with, words of affirmation.
I think about the, was it that you've been compelled to give me a gift. So I feel like the gift you're giving me is not valid because it's Christmas or my birthday and you feel like, okay, we have to sign the card and we have to give the gift. And
it feels obligatory.
Yes. And if it's just kind of like, oh, I picked this up on Hot Topic on the way out, here you go, I thought of you. And like, no, you didn't.
Right. So there are certainly reasons why someone would feel awkward perhaps about receiving a gift. I think most people in close relationships are expected at some point to give each other gifts, expected to give each other words of affirmation, expected to engage in some sort of physical touch other than like asexual relationships, for example, and expected to spend quality time together. These are all things that couples do. It's just part of relationship maintenance. And so to Rachel's point, my position is that if you try and force people into a box like that, you present yourself with this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where you say, well, you must fit into one of these. And then people start doing things in congruence with that position. And then all of a sudden they go, oh yeah, I am a person whose love language is physical touch. And I'll tell you this, I'm single currently. Rachel, I'm on Hinge. And one of the prompts is, my love language is ... Do you want to guess what my response to that is?
I don't know.
It reads, my love language is non-existent because Gary Chapman is a hack and a fraud. And then a little cowboy hat emoji.
Does it start conversations for you?
I have started 2 conversations that way, yes. So there we go. Okay, let's talk a little bit less about me and my dating life and a little bit more about the science because I can see that the 3 of you are like really wanting to get there. So let's just do it. I've done a fair amount of research, and the science is mixed. It's all over the place. I'm going to do a really quick lit review, and then we'll go backward order. We'll start with Sammy and then go through Rachel. So in 2020, there's a study that suggests that the love languages are perceived by people to be real, and that those perceptions correlate significantly with relationship satisfaction. However, a different study from that same year shows that not only does that association between love language and satisfaction, not only does that not exist, but that when they tried through statistical methods to create the 5 factors of love, that cannot be confirmed as like an actual observable measurement. Now, those findings were actually recently confirmed by a panelist at the 2024 International Association for Relationship Research conference. And I know that because I was actually on the panel that author was on. And so she tried to measure and failed. Not by any of her fault. It just confirms that these love languages might not be actually observable or measurable. However, in 2023, there was a qualitative study that said, yes, people report these love languages as being real. And also, there is a sixth love language called check-ins. So the data are everywhere. Okay, everything from yes, this exists and it affects the way that people see their relationships, to no, it's nothing, to yes, it does exist, and also there's a sixth one that no one ever knew about, a secret love language. So my question, and I'll pose this first to Sammy and then through Colter and Rachel, who's right? Which researchers are right? And what does it say that when we look at the recent data that they are so conflicting? Sammy, could you start us off?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard to say in terms of like who's right. I mean, I think from a qualitative standpoint, especially since the information regarding love languages has been out there in pop culture, when you are taking data and then trying to find out if there's different categories of love language, it's not that shocking from a qualitative stance that you're going to see some consistencies that back up that book, right? Because clearly love languages is known, right? So people, to what extent the people or the participants in those studies were influenced by already having the knowledge regarding love languages, that's going to, play an influence on the results. I think one of the reasons why it's kind of hard to probably factor them out, and having these individual variables is because sometimes, like physical touch, you would have to be proximally close and maybe spending time with that person to engage in touch. So they're not these discrete categories. They sometimes are going to have to overlap and co-occur together. I think that there are more love languages, right? And there's love languages co-occurring. And when we do put people into boxes, I wonder if the other ways that we communicate love are starting to not get as much attention in those relationships, that become something that they want even more. Like, let's say yours is physical touch, but then you're not, receiving gifts or something from them or words of affirmation. Does down the line now you desire more words of affirmation because it's something that you're not getting as much, right? And I think in different stages of your relationships too, the ways in which you communicate love are going to be evolving and changing based off of your needs. You could go from being like a long distance relationship, which is when you might want to spend more quality time with them. But then once you're proximally close again, maybe you're looking for another type of these love languages.
That's such a good point about like the dynamism of relationships and how thin and vapid the book is in paying attention to that dynamism. And I think it's part of the reason why scholars become frustrated with it, because it feels so categorical. I actually have thoughts related to that, but I don't want to step on Colter's feet for fear that he has the same thing to offer. So Colter, I'll turn the microphone over to you. What thoughts do you have about the conflicting research?
Yeah, I think it would be great if we had more research, so that, especially quantitative research, so that we could eventually run some sort of meta-analysis and really see across the board, what's happening here, get something a little bit more definitive. So just like almost anything else, you don't want to find yourself cherry picking certain studies and only looking at the studies that confirm it, if you're Gary Chapman or someone else who's a big proponent of the love languages, and ignore the other studies that say this is not working out, and vice versa. I think that in many ways, when I hear about the love languages and I think about the love languages, to me, the analogy or the metaphor is like astrology is to personality as love languages is to communication and love. And that, yes, whenever Mercury is in retrograde, there might be new beginnings in your life. And sometimes there are, but many other times there aren't.
Right.
So just the same with your love language, like, physical touch might be the thing that you crave. And then you find a partner who offers you that. And so suddenly you feel like you've validated the love languages when there are many other ways that this occurs, right? And so I think people have a tendency to engage in some self-fulfilling bias. They read the book, they ask their partner to do something differently. And then if they do, they're suddenly amazed at this, but it runs into the same issue that many other written texts run into as well, whether it's a relationship book or a religious text, is that it's static, right? Mm-hmm. And so it can't evolve as the nature of relationships evolve, and it doesn't always do a great job of capturing the changing needs in relationships, to echo a bit of what Sammy mentioned in her response. And so I love the idea of quality time is the one that gets me, because you know what is interesting in like a long-term marriage? How much people value quality time away from their spouse,
Mm-hmm.
for example, right? And so a love language could be spending quality time with someone, but someone who's really in tune with their partner might also realize that there is the importance of stressing quality time on your own because of relationship dialectics, right? We have
Right.
both the need for autonomy to be self-directed and to do our own independent things, and we also have the need for connection as well. And so if you're just like getting smothered by someone because your love language is quality time, like that's great, but like you don't want to suddenly only spend quality time with just your partner. Research on marital loneliness is increasing, is showing, you know, there's some interesting things happening there. Anyways, I've kind of like gone tangential here, but those are the things that come top of mind for me.
Yeah, and apropos of nothing, you didn't tell your wife Tori to watch this episode, did you?
No, but we talk about these things, right? Like it's okay to be like, we need space for like a day or something, right? Or like go have a girls' night and I'm gonna like sit on the couch and like zone out and watch the Pat McAfee show, or like something that's like not together all the time. Because how burdensome would it be if you were in a relationship where the person only wanted to be with you all day, all the time? It sounds great on paper until like you get 2 days, 3 days. And if you don't believe me, ask any couple that suddenly spent all the time in the world together throughout the pandemic, as soon as the world shut down.
Yeah.
This person who they thought they loved, and now suddenly they're the only person they see 24/7 in the same 900 square foot apartment. It's like, so anyways, all that to say, that's an example where I think the love languages fall short. Is that, again, it's great that it gets people thinking about the ideas of like, let's adapt how I communicate with my partner, maybe meet their needs, but at the same time, it doesn't capture, in my opinion, the full nuance of how needs change on a day-to-day basis in our relationships.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, bringing in relational dialectics theory is a really smart move here, because the conceptualization of the love language is mostly a theoretical, and I think that theory ought to inform our investigations. You know, that's just the deductive scholar in me. You know, you don't have to adhere perfectly closely to theory, but like at the end of the day, we want to make sure that like when we're making these hypotheses and assumptions, that there's something, some sort of backdrop guiding us. I also think about like indirect expressions of affection, ways in which we show support without, like, for example, like quality time might be watching a romantic movie together. It might be that I'm in a wiffle ball league and my partner shows up one time to cheer my team on. That's fun. I don't know if I want my partner there every single time I'm playing, though. You know what I mean? And then from the gift giving perspective, it's like, do you want the gift or do you want the thought? Does the thought count more than the gift? Because if the thought counts more than the gift, as people often say, then the love language itself is inherently flawed. Now, I can tell, Rachel, you've been champing at the bit here, wanting to get something off about this. So why don't you give your piece on where you think the research is or isn't at?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a little bit of a bold stance here, and I don't think the research, and I don't think anyone has it right. I'm a firm believer that not all research is created equal. And I'd like to soften my language a little bit. I think there's this problem with how we're conceptualizing and measuring love languages that inherently flaws this research, because again, Gary Chapman says that it's both how we give and receive love. And that creates this confounding measurement problem. And so people are measuring it differently and incorrectly oftentimes. And so that's creating all of these issues that is like throughout this entire research experience. And so I have a hard time buying into any of it because I just think we're measuring it incorrectly. But I also think that when I think about a corollary from a theory perspective for love languages that currently exists, that would be a really good foundation for some of this work on love. It would be support gaps, right? There's these 5 ways that we give support to our partners, and they're contextually appropriate. So during different moments where I need support, there's a certain kind of support that's going to meet my needs at the moment. And so if I have a need for a certain type of support and my partner provides me with a different type of support support, it creates a support gap, and that has impacts on our relationships. And I think very strongly that love and affection fall in the same way, which is not all types of love are going to be appropriate at all moments. And so we want to make sure that we're providing a contextually appropriate type of love to our partner that's going to meet their needs at the moment. It will not always be appropriate to give our partner physical affection. And similarly, sometimes it's not helpful to give them a gift, right? That's not going to show them that you love them at that moment. And so to me, I just feel like we're approaching the research incorrectly. And to your point, James, it's because we don't have a really strong theoretical grounding for this work. And, to Gary Chapman's credit, you could kind of consider it a grounded theory approach where he went into a space and started talking to people and saw a phenomenon happening and he captured it in words. But then, you got to consider that he did that work in a very homogenous group of people. And so that has implications for the kinds of, recommendations that he's forwarding from it, or the kinds of suppositions he's making from this work. And so, yeah, my gut instinct is that no one has it right now.
Yeah.
Rachel, I think that you and I are very much on the same page, probably because we're both experts in survey design. That's probably got a little something to do with it. I have one more study sort of in my back pocket here. There's a 2024 review of the literature. It's a really good review. It's not a meta study, but it is a good review. And Sean, if you would be so kind, this is the moment in which I'd like to display the graphic that I have prepared. It might be a little tough to read. You can pause to read, screenshot it, do whatever you want. This table is a really good assumption. I've highlighted the important notes. In the conclusion of this literature review, they end with the following sentence that I thought was really profound, and it reads, "Perhaps the ironic lesson learned from evaluating the popular yet now empirically debunked concept of love languages is that researchers need to speak science in a language that the public can more readily connect with and understand." I believe in this so strongly. We hide our research behind paywalls. We use big fancy jargon and statistical methodologies that are often useful but difficult to communicate. So I do, based on this review, have a two-part question for you all. Perception is often reality. So my question is, why are people so drawn to the idea of love languages, not as just like behaviors, but as a predictive or determining factor in selecting partners? And what can we as relationship scientists do to speak better to the folks who are predisposed to those questions? I'm going to let y'all sort out who wants to go first.
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons that people are drawn to the love languages is because of the way in which it's communicated. First of all, it's an accessible book that anybody can buy, right? There's a lot of even like blogs and stuff on the topic. Even on TikTok, there are tons of videos on love languages, and it's so simplified, right? It's easy to understand these, different ways in which we communicate love. Everybody can relate to them. Everybody can see them doing them. And I think sometimes in, our research, like we've talked about it being full of jargon or just like really complicated to read, we also have to remember that the average American or anybody, even internationally, cannot just access our research. They have to pay large sums of money because of the ways in which they're published through, the journals and such. One of the things that I value in my, as an academic is going on podcasts, doing blogs to disseminate the information that we know as relationships experts to everyday people, and trying to debunk those things, or even, put forth ways in which people can utilize different strategies or stuff like that. And so I think this is one of the steps. Like a podcast like this is giving, open access to the information so that everybody can kind of have a better understanding of the pros and cons of certain things. And in this case, it's the love languages. But I think it's just the relatability and the easy understanding that Gary Chapman had kind of written the book in that made it just kind of soar.
Why, thank you for the compliment. I'm taking that as a full-on compliment that this podcast is going to save relationships. Coulter, you agree, right?
Of course. Obviously. It already has. If you've been listening for 70 episodes, then your relationship is undoubtedly better than if you hadn't listened. Gary Chapman did a great job putting together something that's very marketable,
Mm.
and that has, like most things similar, it operates off of a kernel of validity, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
people, like enough people have lived this and have experienced um, unaffectionate partners that they're like, oh, my love language must be physical touch, and then they rebound and they're in a relationship with someone who is very affectionate, and so it makes sense to people, right? But you're right in that it simplifies things so much. And he also wrote a book. I'm going to butcher the name, but it's essentially like the 5 languages of apologies. And I was remarking to my friend right before I came on this podcast today, how convenient that when it comes to the languages of apologies, there are also 5 languages. What a nice, easy number of things to remember. Whenever you're, having dinner with a group of friends, it's easy to bring up the 5 love languages. We mentioned earlier, there's likely way more ways to express love than those 5, but no one's going to want to listen to you at a dinner party be like, let me tell you about the 22 different ways to maintain relationships. They're going to walk away and take their little cheese plate somewhere else and go find a better conversation, because most people don't want to have that in-depth conversation. So yes, I will give credit where credit is due, that he has created something that is very marketable, that has enough validity, a hint of validity from people's experiences, that it has caught on. Which again, as researchers and as professors, I think that we should find ways to utilize that to help people realize that there's some validity here, but let's dig deeper, right? Just like we want our students to dig deeper into the concepts we teach. I think instead of it being about debunking the 5 love languages, I think it's an exercise in critical thinking. And let's take this thing that a lot of people are familiar with, and let's think a little bit more deeply about it and see where it might be wrong, or where it could be short-sighted, or where it could be improved.
So what I'm hearing is like the short answer here is you're kind of like yes-anding it, right? We're like, yeah, these exist. They are real. They're observable, demonstrable behaviors, and there's more to be known about this. So let's challenge what we think we know. I like that approach. I do. Rachel, as the only person who is not a professor in this conversation, what's your position?
Yeah, so I think the reason why love languages are so catchy, I think there's a couple things. One is that it's a very box checky sort of thing. If you just do this one thing, then everything in your relationship is going to be fixed. So if you show your partner love in their primary love language, your relationship is just going to be so much better. And so it's just easily understandable, and it feels attainable and doable. I also think everyone sort of touched on this. This is a subject people care about. Love is just a delightful thing to think about and to opine on. And so people want to read about it. It's something that's relatable and applicable to your own life. And so as scholars, I think we're often seen as very stuffy and out of touch. And this is a guy who can say I've met with all of these couples, and these are real stories and real people who have been really affected by this framework that they've applied to their life. And I think as researchers, to Sammy's point, we could really be doing a better job studying the things that are of importance in the moment to people who are really in relationships, or, trying to better a marriage, whatever that looks like. And also to be more publicly facing about it. And so, yeah, we're all sort of out there doing the blogs and the podcasts and the TikToks and stuff. And I think that more of that needs to happen. Researchers need to be seen as people so that their credibility can lend itself to providing that kind of research-backed advice, so that they don't have the public doesn't have to go search out the Gary Chapmans of the world,
Yeah, I think that's totally fair.
Or at least go search out John Gottman instead, right? Yeah. 7 Principles for Making Marriage Works. I know 7's more than 5. It's gonna be a little bit more effort, but that's a book that has a lot of great things you can apply to your life. That's based on decades of research that he's actually done as a social scientist.
Yeah, I mean, Gottman's work and the methodologies he employed are so impressive. Even, several decades later, just very, very impressive stuff. And that doesn't mean that it's gospel, right? And I think that's kind of the point, that the whole point of this conversation is to remind ourselves that we are not talking about gospels or things that are guaranteed. And indeed, that there's a lot of nuance that must be discussed, must be covered if we are going to like try and figure out how relationships tend to work most of the time. And you'll note that I'm being very careful with my language there in a way that I don't think Gary Chapman was, but that I think he ought to have been.
Yeah. I also think that there are other things that we need to be focusing on. Like love is obviously one of the ways. It's really funny because a lot of my friends, when they were getting married and stuff, for some reason, this book was recommended to them. And I'm like, this is an ironic time to be reading the book. I'm like, you're getting married. You already are communicating love to them. Like, don't overthink it, right? Like you've already figured those out. But I think things like conflict kind of actually deserve more attention, because we know that the way in which you communicate during conflict has a huge substantial impact on the longevity of your relationship, where we have yet to find, if you just communicate love in a different way, like you're not going to be as satisfied and then not committed, or, you know, your relationship's going to dissolve, right? I mean, typically you've engaged in these loving behaviors throughout the course and trajectory of your relationship, and they have some utility already effective in them. But things like conflict, or, you know, talking about money, like other types of important things, I think is really missing the mark. And I wish that we paid more attention to those types of things as well, that there's actually literature behind them of what we should do, how we should reframe things, how we should reword things so that they're not taken as like criticisms or something like that. That really should be the focus, more so than these love languages, because again, we haven't found research that's really backing them up. And I agree with Rachel. I don't trust any of it.
Sammy, I
jump off of what Sammy just said. Mm-hmm. And with conflict, especially, is such an important thing to be able to work through well and manage well in a long-term relationship. So much of what we know about good conflict management is this collaborative approach, right? Like, it's not me versus you, which we often fall into that competitive approach, but it's me and you versus the problem. And I wonder, as I was thinking about the love languages, if creating these nice little boxes kind of in a way could stoke feelings of scorekeeping and maybe even grudge holding, if like, or animosity, if people refuse to abide by your primary love language, right? After reading this book, if your partner just won't hug you and you are a physical touch person, is that going to build up, are you going to start engaging in that scorekeeping and thinking, well, I did this and it's your love language, but I'm not receiving it from you. And I just wonder if that has an iatrogenic effect. I think that's the fancy SAT word for whenever something kicks back the opposite way it's supposed to work. Do either of you have thoughts on that? Or James, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, here in Utah, we use the word boomerang, a boomerang effect.
Yes.
I've never heard that word, but I do like it. I had a feeling that one of you was going to bring up the more dark side of interpersonal communication, which is why the next question that I have kind of hopes to reframe the issue. Now, when we talk about love languages broadly, we're really just talking about relationship maintenance behaviors. And if you want a refresher on that, in the first family episode that we did, we covered those, as well as in season 3, episode 2, we covered relationship maintenance behaviors. But the love languages are strictly pro-social maintenance behaviors. My question is, and y'all have kind of already answered this a little bit with your discussion of conflict, but what other relationship maintenance behaviors are the love languages looking over here, and how might that neglect potentially damage a relationship? Coulter, I know you just talked about the boomerang effect. Are there any other spaces in which we can see those neglecting efforts maybe hurting us a little bit?
Maybe like if you think about like your network, your social network, I think
I was hoping you'd say that. That's what I study, for the record.
Yeah, I think there's something there that like these are very focused on like you and your partner in isolation, but we also know that so much about your environment also plays a role in your relationship functioning. And so we're really glossing over how other people in our lives also like play a role in the connections that we share with our partner. So being able to together connect with other people in our lives meaningfully is important to the functioning of our relationship. So I do think that's something that's overlooked.
Don't you think like to accomplish that, it requires a partner who's willing to like step back and let you have that freedom to do that, right? And to have like other meaningful relationships with other family members or friends. which is why I would propose a new love language of doing nothing. Because in addition to all 5 of them being pro-social things, they all are actual things, right? And I think that a good partner also knows when to step back and let their spouse or their boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever, like, to do other things, right? Like, I just think it's a little, I think it can become overbearing potentially.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and they all seem so positive on the surface. But as we know, though, like, it can cross thresholds too, where it's like you're constantly touching each other. It's like too much PDA in some situations too. So it's like it has to be in context to the situations. And I think that that's where the dark side kind of comes in play with love languages. You can look at the surface and all 5 of these love languages seem great on its face, right? But they can cross these thresholds where they become like seemingly positive to seemingly negative by engaging in it too much or too frequently or something like that. And so sometimes doing nothing, like Coulter's suggesting, is an actually very positive thing. You know, somebody has to kind of go through their trials and tribulations themselves too, to, you know, reattribute the reasons.
Yeah, I mean, if your love language is touch, let's say, and you're upset because, I don't know, your grandpa died or something like that, physical touch might be helpful there, right? Your partner comes to you and they hug you and, you know, hey, it's okay, and you bury your face in their shoulder. If you're mad at your partner and they are the one who has made you upset, their physical touch probably won't make things better, right? The doing nothing might actually help a lot more there, right? The space giving, right? So it's like, yeah, my love language is physical touch, but like, if my partner's the one who pissed me off, they're not going to solve it with more of their physical touch. Like, that's just not going to work. So yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think it's worth attending to.
Also, if they're neglecting to like listen to you, right? And they're just like giving you a gift to like kind of, make you be quiet or make you like get over the situation. It's like, that's not resolving the context at issue. Or the conversation at issue. So it's also important that you can't just like engage in one of those love languages consistently all the time just to make it make up for everything else, right? You also have to be listening, reassuring, or whatever it might be that's, contextually important to the conversation at hand.
I think like also we would be remiss if we're talking about the dark side of love languages for a minute to talk about the coercive elements in this theory as well, because like to your point, like if we consider this sort of like a box checking activity, that's like, we have a primary love language, it's the only way to fill your love tank, like someone in this universe, and I say that like hypothetically knowing that people on TikTok talk about this all the time, could be like, my love language is physical touch. And if you don't do that for me, then you don't love me. And then why are we in this relationship, right? And it can get very coercive very fast. And you see that played out explicitly in his book. And I think I gave that example earlier as well. So very, very dark stuff.
Yeah, very absolutist, very dogmatic, like I was kind of alluding to. So yeah, there's a lot to be looked over, and that'll kind of nicely transition into my final prompt, which is, since we're being haters, right, we might as well just keep on hating. To all of you, this is a question to all of you, which is your least favorite of the love languages? And I'll ask it a different way. Like, of the 5 popularized love languages, which do you think is either like least tied to relational outcomes or maybe most likely to be overestimated by people in a relationship or people who are looking for a relationship? If you had to pick one, which is the least valuable of the love languages?
You have to answer. Yes. I also was going to say
yeah.
Gifts. Coulter, are you on gifts?
Yeah, I think I'll go gifts on this one. Someone said it earlier, but gifts can be burdensome. It's great to receive things, but like, I don't know. It can seem kind of cringy at times. Like to me, it's like if I messed up in a relationship and I'm going to bring you flowers and then that suddenly will amend for like something heinous that I've done. That just doesn't seem to really fit.
Yeah, I was talking with Sean, the producer, during our break, and we talked about gifts, and like he said, he feels often burdened by them. And I said, one thing that I do when I'm in a relationship is when I'm just like walking around or talking or doing nothing with my significant other, if they mention that they like something or want something or are a fan of something, I pop my phone open and I take a note. because I'm never going to remember that. And then when gift giving season comes around, I have this cute little list of usually not all that expensive stuff that they've just said they like. So when they open it, yeah, they're getting a gift, but the message being sent is, I pay attention to you. I care about what your likes and your needs and your wants are. And I've got one of these wants or needs for you. Like one time I did it with like a very specific brand of lip gloss, the brand of which I have, Glossier is the brand in question. And like at the time, my partner was like, how did you know? And I was like, because you mentioned it 22 times over the course of the last 6 months. So I had a little tally going, and like, that's the thing you seem to want. So I got it for you. And that has nothing to do with the gift per se. It is all about the maintenance behavior of, I'm paying attention to you, and here's evidence that I pay attention and care about you. And that can take multiple forms, including but not limited to gifts.
I think what's interesting is that what you said is like, what you're saying is gift giving is about noticing, right? Like you noticed I said I like something, and so I appreciate that you noticed. Now, I would flip that around from the perspective of someone who has read the love languages and is like, I am a words of affirmation person. I think that where it could go wrong is then they're only looking for words of affirmation, and they're not appreciating the other efforts that their partner might be putting in. And so what I would worry about is that someone's like, I only want my primary love language or my primary and secondary love language. I think the healthier way to be in a relationship is to appreciate and notice the variety of ways that your partner expresses their love to you. And don't be weirdly demanding that they have to do it in the way that's your preferred way. Like, what if you, as the person so desperately in need of love here, that you just learn to reframe a variety of acts that or behaviors that your partner does as different ways that they express love, and like, don't engage in scorekeeping, how many times you've been hugged this month, and instead realize that hugs are good, but so are words of affirmation, and so are gifts. And I think the research shows that most people like all five for the most part, and so I think noticing is an important aspect of this process.
Rachel, Sammy, do you have any thoughts there? And it's okay if no.
In the 2024 review article from last January, the researchers sort of position love languages as you're giving love through a healthy diet. So like, there are lots of fad diets out there that tell you to trim it down and only eat certain things. But those can have, unintentional harmful side effects. And so when you have a well-balanced, healthy diet that gives you a little bit of everything at contextually appropriate moments, you have a much more healthy functioning body. And in the opposite, it's like our relationship will be healthier for having a well-rounded diet of love. So I really like that comparison.
Oh, you're making me hungry. I'm so ready for lunch. No, it's a good point. And I think what we've all been collectively trying to say here is like, avoid the absolutism that the book unfortunately proposes, right? And acknowledge that like different parts of your relationships, you can also learn about things that you like and don't like. My most recent relationship told me that I like cats way more than I thought I did. Especially orange cats. And if you had asked me 4 years ago, are you a cat person or a dog person? I'd be like, I'm a dog person. But after that relationship, I learned to love and value cats in a way that I never had before. And I think the same is true of the love languages, where you might enter a relationship saying, I'm a big physical touch person. And then your partner teaches you that you care a little bit more about the other things as well. And I think that's a really important way to step into these relationships. We have 2 minutes left. Coulter has already done this. I'm going to ask Rachel and Sammy, if you had to, if you could create one brand new love language now that doing nothing is off the table, what would it be?
Sammy, do you have one?
I think it would be something like, listening, something like that, listening to like my needs, not my needs in love, just, in any kind of context or situation. I think that, that emotional support is really important too. Or just, there are some ways in which support is communicated through the other like love needs, but kind of one that is related to like the support of a partner.
I like that. Rachel, do you have one?
Yeah, I have a couple, but
Oh.
yeah. So one of them I think is like a cultural connection. Like there's something about like ceremony that I think is missing from this.
Oh, yeah.
One of them I think is maybe food.
Food for
Like
sure.
there's something
Yeah.
that's missing there. And then the last one is humor, I think is like blissfully absent for whatever reason.
Crazy,
But
right?
yeah, I think it's such like a vital part of our relationships that's just like not here, but it is a way that we express love.
That's such a good point. I am shocked by the fact that the love languages don't seem to involve any sort of idiosyncratic behavior, inside jokes, or shared things that bring you closer to the person. And so for that, I would like idiosyncrasies to be on there. The sort of thing where you like bump into your partner and they say, "Excuse me," and you go, "Hello, but I'm not sorry," which is a really specific reference to one of my favorite cartoon shows. That like if I was with someone, I would want them to laugh at that joke. And if I did it with a friend, I wouldn't care if they were confused.
Yes.
Okay. I think we have exhausted our time. I want to thank all three of you so much for your patience and your diverse perspectives. It has been an awesome, awesome episode. It's been an awesome season. I really appreciate everybody's time. And on that note, I think we're ready to begin our countdown. I don't know what we're going to do for season 9, but I'm sure we'll have something awesome planned. Until then, I hope everybody has a very relaxing and restorative break. And if you work in the private sector, have fun at work.
You've been listening to Red Rock Relationships, a podcast about communication. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. If you'd like to be on the show or have questions for us, please send us an email to redrockrelationships@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Red Rock Relationships. Thank you again. And remember, it all begins with good communication.